Hello there, and welcome back. I hope you're all well. I must apologise for the long delay. Between my internet cutting out and job stuff, it's been a bit difficult to get content out, but hopefully moving forward, we'll be able to go back to a more reliable schedule. Today, we're talking about tax, that gloriously interesting subject that it is. The reasoning for this video is that I was, as I always am, reading about people's attitudes, ideas and some polling data. It struck me for the 1000th time that you often hear complaints about the Democrats, Labour or other left of centre parties wanting to put taxes up. But in almost every instance, the people complaining about the tax rises were people who would never be affected by them. How does this even work? I found in this instance that there are a few things at play here. The concept of marginal taxation often escapes people, and for those who do get it, they don't want to be taxed any higher when they have made it, or in the words of Steinbeck, they are temporarily embarrassed millionaires. I'm going to start off by first breaking down marginal tax bands and how they work, the advantages and disadvantages of it, and whether a flat tax, as proposed by some tax code reformers, is a good idea. But why tax? Taxation as a concept is part of the social contract. We are each of us sovereign executive beings capable of rational thought, and so through our reasoning, our consent is required to do things. The problem is that, with everyone having sovereignty in that way, it leads to anarchy and through it a harsh and pitiless world where might is right. Justice does not extend beyond what you yourself can enforce. This is, of course, the topic of many a dystopian world. The social contract is that we as a society surrender some of that executive sovereignty and our ability to enforce it in exchange for certain guarantees. The extent to which those guarantees extend is part of our political system's push and pull, and the axis upon which most political thought rests. What does this have to do with taxation? Everything. For the social contract to be enforced, the governing body has always required goods or money to pay for it. From the earlier societies where tribute was paid in earthenware or bread or food, to the advent of money, to today's world, where we have always sought to find a way to band together. The modern Westphalian state system is just the latest development on this age-old idea. We've been paying taxes for a very, very long time. At the core, the two twin purposes of a governing body are at the heart of taxation. The first, security of the territorial entity, so our countries both internal and external, and the second is access to justice. When those two things are not provided, the social contract tends to fail and the populace tends to revolt. Over time, new responsibilities such as education and health have been added, and over time, responsibilities will continue to be added as our society develops, becomes more complex, and has to adapt to new challenges. That's the basis for taxation. Now, libertarians everywhere will of course be screaming at me for justifying theft, but they're content to live in poverty in a theoretical homestead world, so let's leave that right to the side where they belong. Instead, let's move on to how income tax works, as that is often the most misunderstood out of the lot. We do not use a flat tax system in most European and American societies. In fact, most of the world, aside from some of the steppe countries in Central Asia and some of the Balkan and Eastern European countries, use progressive tax systems. What's the difference? Well, a progressive tax system is quite simple, even if it seems quite complicated. It separates taxation into bands with multiple levels, kind of like level scaling on games. Most people pay basic rates, and after a certain amount is earned, the rest is taxed at a new rate and then continually scaling up across bands until you reach a top tax rate. I know that seems quite abstract, so I'll give it a breakdown with the British system. Everyone who earns under £100,000 has their first £12,500 tax-free. This is a personal allowance. You are then taxed at a basic rate of 20% for everything else up to £37,700. Any income after the £37,700 is taxed at a rate of 40%. Any income over the £150,000 is taxed at a top rate of 45%. This does not mean that the government immediately takes 45% of your income, which is what so many people seem to believe. The average salary in the United Kingdom in 2021 is £29,600. That means that the average person, in fact most people, will pay no tax on the first £12,500 they earn and will then pay 20% on the remaining £17,100, which works out to £3,420 a year, as opposed to the £13,320 they'd be paying if they were indeed taxed at 45% on their £29,600. Obviously, that's just rough numbers based on the average salary and the basic income tax bands, but it illustrates it quite well. The idea is that the personal allowance will cover your basic needs such as housing, food, and other such expenses, and then income after that is taxed. In theory, reasonable individuals should be able to manage their money well enough to make sure all needs are met with that personal allowance. The United States has something similar, with differing tax bands and exemptions that apply in certain cases. One of the largest and possibly most important differences is that the United Kingdom has a software that applies automatically. It is called PAYE, or Pay As You Earn, and has been in operation since 1944. Canada, Australia and France all have similar systems. In the United States, the software TurboTax is a lesser paid market version of PAYE. Instead, most Americans will have to fill out a tax return, which those in the United Kingdom will know of as a self-assessment. This is where you manually input your numbers and in some cases calculate your tax. This increases the likelihood of errors and is often a pretty painful process for people to do on an annual basis, especially when you have to factor in various deductions, add-ons, allowances and other such information. PAYE is taken straight from payroll that employers submit and is then calculated. Any exemptions you wish to apply for, you notify HMRC and PAYE. It's a simple solution and most people in the United Kingdom never worry about doing their taxes because of this system. Flat tax is a very popular idea amongst some circles because it in effect simplifies the tax code to a ridiculous degree. It is literally one rate for everyone and that's it. The problem with flat tax is, well, the flat tax. It is known as a regressive tax in that it will hurt the poorest more than it will help them. In theory, a flat tax, simple tax will be easy because it reduces the likelihood of errors and it therefore means you can spend less on the IRS and so reduce overall taxes, in theory. The issue is that when you look at how a flat tax would apply, you start to see the problem. Say a flat tax is at a basic rate of 25%. 25% of a person's income in a year. So, the poverty line in the United Kingdom is around £15,000. In the United States, for a family, it's $26,000. In France, it's around €13,000. 25% of £15,000 is £3,750 in tax. 25% of $26,000 is $6,500 in tax. 25% of €13,000 is €3,250 in tax. In a progressive tax system, keeping that exact same 25% rate, someone on £15,000 pays £625 in tax. Someone on $26,000 pays $3,375 in tax. Someone on €13,000 pays €125 in tax. No more numbers please, my dyslexia hurts. Obviously, this is just a quick working out assuming the same rates in all three countries, but you get the picture. Under a progressive tax system, there are allowances and deductions all made to respect the fact that people who live around the poverty line are not adversely harmed by taxation. Under a flat tax system, no such provision could exist. 25% of someone's income when they already live in poverty is a huge amount. That 25% is a vital, important chunk of their income. I'll do a video later about how expensive poverty is, but the general gist of it is that despite what right-wing politicians like to imply, people in poverty spend a large amount of their income on absolute necessities. In fact, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, an organisation in the United Kingdom which tracks poverty, found that poorer households are often spending more on a monthly basis than the median household, which seems utterly mind-boggling until you realise why that is. Poorer households do not have the same earning level, and so a greater portion of their spend goes to their necessities, but also the quality of good that a poor person can buy. A good example of this is a pair of shoes. I can go down to town and buy a crap pair of shoes for £20, and they'll last me maybe 6 months. I can go and buy a pretty nice pair of shoes for £130, and that'll last me 6 years. The problem is, for most people on poverty, is that they can't afford to save that £130 because otherwise they've got nothing to wear, and so they're in a cycle of constantly spending £20 on a crap pair of shoes every 6 or so months. When you factor in the rise of payday loans and overdraft fees, and then you can see how this cycle perpetuates itself. It's very expensive to be poor. A flat tax system would punish people in this situation because it would end up taking a greater portion of their income than a progressive tax system would, and that's why we don't use flat taxes. Someone tell Ted. The psychology of taxation in elections is fascinating. It always gets narrowed down in the press to Party A wants to raise taxes, Party B wants to lower taxes, even though it doesn't quite work like that. Take the Labour Party in 2019, which proposed raising taxes on the top 10% of earners in the United Kingdom. That's people who earn nearly 3 times the median wage at over £80,000. About 80% of people would never have to worry about having to pay the additional rate. Yet, that policy was wildly unpopular amongst the general public because Labour are going to increase taxes. The problem for Social Democrats and Socialists moving forward is that they are held to a higher standard and are therefore in a catch-22. To set out an ambitious programme to reverse the neglect of social services and infrastructure over the past decade, they must spend. But to spend, they need to raise taxes as they are seen as economically reckless for deficit spending. But to raise taxes is to lose votes. And so the only way many of those closer to the centre wing see out of this is to not make ambitious commitments, which then fractures the party because it's seen as a betrayal of the voting base. This is the trap the US Democrats have been in since the Reagan presidency. It's the trap that Ed Miliband and Jeremy Corbyn both fell foul of in 2015, 17 and 19 respectively, and it's also the trap that Keir Starmer is falling afoul of. For progressive parties, breaking out of this trap is essential, and bear in mind that once in government you can deficit spend, and the return on deficit spending, if correctly done, is vast. The economic potential of deficit spending on net positive programs is hugely unrealised under many current administrations. By that, I mean this. Say many people in the United Kingdom suffer from muscular weakness in the leg. It costs £50 to prevent it per person. In half the cases, people will go on to have a damaged bone structure that requires surgery to fix and months of rehab. Spending £50 per person ends up saving thousands in the surgery and then more still in the cost of rehab and the lost tax from someone not being able to work. Education is another similar policy where the investment from government is often tripled in savings. Prevention is nearly always cheaper than the cure. In office, a progressive government will likely be able to prove this to the populace providing the Keynesian formula is strictly followed. It means Social Democrats and Socialists have to be canny about the commitments they make and how they address this to the populace, but that is a different discussion for a different day. You can see elements of that in my video on why the left loses and why the working class votes Conservative. It's also worth mentioning that taxation isn't always a net loss. Many people are of the belief that if you raise taxes, the people have less disposable income at the end of the month. That part is true, but when you also factor in discretionary income, the picture starts to change. The best example of this is healthcare in the United States versus socialised healthcare in other countries. The average cost of insurance in the United States is $495 a month, roughly $6,000 a year. This obviously doesn't include deductibles and co-pays, so in reality, you're going to be paying a fair bit more, but let's just use that direct $6,000 figure. Healthcare is one of the areas in which the more government involvement there is, the more efficient the system becomes, unless you're Singapore and have an incredibly authoritarian government. The NHS is paid for through direct taxation, so it can be a bit difficult to estimate exactly how much it costs per person, but going off OECD figures, the United Kingdom spends roughly £3,000 per person on healthcare. That's half as much without any deductibles, without any co-pays, without any max limits on seeing a doctor or out-of-network care or anything like that. That in turn means that whilst the disposable income may be lower because of higher taxation to pay for that healthcare, in reality, discretionary income goes up because now you're spending at least $3,000 odd less because you no longer need to pay for private health insurance if you don't want to. I would be remiss if I didn't also mention redistribution as a result of taxation. Now, the minute people hear that, they think scary communist, but it really isn't that. Think of it this way: the modern economy runs on demand. If everyone starts earning less or wages become stagnant as the cost of living rises, especially as wealth concentration in the top 10% of earners increases, then your economy is going to start to stutter. This is because people with less will buy less. With taxation, I, as a policymaker, can increase taxation on the most wealthy slice with very little direct effect to their income or quality of life, and fund programs which increases the discretionary income of the bottom percentiles, thus increasing the amount of demand in the economy. This then translates to more jobs and more growth, usually more money for the wealthiest people too. This is a massive positive effect, and when done right, spreads prosperity and wealth. This is exactly what was happening in the United States in the post-war years, and this is without even touching on the moral arguments for why billionaires really shouldn't exist. The healthiest economy is one where we get as close to equality as possible so that the money continues to cycle around. To conclude, I would say that taxation is not an impediment to prosperity. It can often be a way of building it. We as a society need to stop seeing taxation as a loss and more as an investment in our communities in the form of a mutual fund. Until we do, we are going to be stuck in a simplistic dichotomy that is uninformed of the realities of the society we live in, and so result in less informed policy decisions by our politicians. I hope you've all enjoyed this episode. I'll see you again on the weekend. This is what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments section and on the Discord. Thank you and goodbye.